Welcome to Doctors on Call. I'm Jenna Miller. Parkinson's is a progressive disorder of the central nervous system that affects movement, often including tremors. It's very common with more than 90,000 cases in the United States per year. Parkinson's is a lifelong condition that affects the brain and worsens over time. Parkinson's happens when cells in the brain that produce dopamine stop working or die. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter, which is a chemical that sends messages between nerve cells or between nerve cells and muscle cells to help the body function. Dopamine plays many roles in the body and affects both physical and mental function. The symptoms of Parkinson's are unique to each individual. If you're living with Parkinson's, it's important to know the range of symptoms so that you can recognize them and work with your doctor to determine the best treatment plan. We'll learn more about Parkinson's disease and how support is provided for those as caregivers, families, and patients on Doctors on Call with our guests, Elaine Potachik and Colleen Bixenman of Parkinson Families of Northwest Kansas.
Presentation of Doctors on Call on Smoky Hills PBS is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from
Russell Regional Hospital, experts, neighbors, friends.
Our team at Smith County Memorial Hospital is always striving to exceed expectations of our patients and guests. Your family is our family.
We want to thank Elaine and Colleen for being our guests tonight. And I'd like to start, before we start with some of our questions, a little bit about each of your backgrounds and how you got involved with this.
I started seeing a doctor early in about 2006. I saw a neurologist for 8 years, never received a diagnosis. I had tremor in my left leg, tremor in my arm. I did mental health with children, and so I either was too busy or she felt like, the doctor that I saw, that it was lack of sleep and anxiety, which it can, the diagnosis oftentimes includes those things. Well, in 2015, a neurosurgeon came to Colby, and he wanted to talk about improving your quality of life with deep brain stimulators. Never heard of them, didn't have a diagnosis. My mother had Parkinson's. And so after the presentation, I went up to him and I said, I think I have Parkinson's, but I'm seeing a neurologist and she doesn't think so. And he did a couple of things and said, you need to come see me. So it was about 4 or 5 weeks later, I was diagnosed the day before my birthday in 2015. And I had REM sleep disorder probably almost all my life. That is one of the early indicators. I'd lost my sense of smell when I was in college and just blamed it on sinus problems and, didn't have a clue. But most people all people with Parkinson's usually will have symptoms anywhere from 10 to 20 years before diagnosis. And they just don't know what they are. Constipation, they're not sleeping. Some of the early signs are the tremor, and then your handwriting gets a lot smaller, messier, the loss of smell, the trouble moving or walking, which I felt like at that time I was shuffling more than I was walking. And another thing that was happening shortly after I was diagnosed is I had masked face. And at that time people said, are you mad at me? Well, your muscles. This is a muscle disease that affects every muscle and organ in your body because every organ's a muscle. And when those slow down and don't work as well, then it's difficult to have a smile or facial movements. And so that's really how I was diagnosed. And then in August of 18, Dr. Van Sickle, the neurosurgeon, came back to Colby and did another presentation. He had been in Garden City and was just wanting people in western Kansas to learn more about it. And when he took one look at me after 3 years, he said, "Are any of your medications working?" And I said, "Well, I just had wore a wristwatch to find out how much time I was off. And I'm off more than I'm on, which means your medications are not working very well, if at all." He said, "I think it's time to talk DBS." And so in February 8th of 2019, I had deep brain stimulators, which he's been my miracle in itself. He did the surgery, and I have gotten along very well since I've had deep brain stimulators, which is already going on more than 5 years. So that's how I got started. Colleen has she has essential tremors, and I'll let her share a little bit about that.
Well, it's genetic, and a lot of times it runs in families. My grandpa had tremors, and at the time they probably didn't even know what it was, and other family members that I have the tremors. But one of the reasons why I got involved with the Parkinson's group was because my mother-in-law had Parkinson's, and she was elderly. And when she was diagnosed, none of us had any idea what Parkinson's was or what to do for her. But what we learned was that with the medications, it's very hard to manage the medications, the symptoms. And so after about 5 years, she did pass. And but when they started having these classes, I started getting involved with it. Also, it helps with the tremors to learn more. And the exercises really help a lot.
Excellent. And we tend to see essential tremors. It's diagnosed 8 to 10 times more often than Parkinson's. About 50% is familial, which is family related. Like Parkinson's, the genetics of that's only 10 to 15%, but the other 85% approximately is environmental. So we have pesticides, herbicides, chemicals, toxins in the air. They just don't know what's causing that. But with essential tremors, about 50% from the literature that I read will be diagnosed with Parkinson's as they get older and the disease gets more difficult to manage. But they do have DBS, focused ultrasound, and several mechanical tools that you can use for both Parkinson's and essential tremors that can control those tremors.
Now, you had mentioned the environment and genetics as well, but how does one protect themselves from that? Is there, you obviously can't live in a bubble, but what can a person do to try to protect themselves?
Well, I have gone to more of a restricted diet, and the types of things that I eat: grass-fed beef, farm-fed chickens, eggs. Milk is one thing my digestion just doesn't handle. The cheeses and all the milk products, so I pretty much stay away from those because of the constipation and the pain in the gut. But I think you need air humidifiers in your houses, or that helps. We have been checking windows and entrances. I live on a farm, and so all the chemicals and the farmers around us, there's really not much you can do but stay inside. when things are being sprayed. And I can smell. I can just about tell what it is when they put chemicals on their ground. But yeah, it's really hard. There's 4 things that they really encourage you to do with Parkinson's, and that's diet. Well, exercise first, diet, good sleeping habits, and then socialization. And those delay, from the research, the progress. So there are a lot of brain-based fruits and vegetables and items that you can eat that I have in my diet almost every day. Fermented foods are important. Dill pickles, sauerkraut. Thank goodness I like sauerkraut. But those are all things that I think you just have to look at everything a different way. I seldom drink water out of a plastic bottle because of the chemicals that they're finding in all the plastics that are. So there just is a lot of things that I think we have to, and I listen to a lot of podcasts.
Sure. Now, you had mentioned the deep brain stimulators. That's very interesting to me. Colleen, have you had any experience with that?
I haven't myself, but seeing the difference in Elaine from when she was first diagnosed, and she has shared with us that she had difficulties buttoning her clothes and even cutting her meat herself at the beginning, and then with the deep brain stimulation, it's just changed her life. And I do know one individual who has essential tremors that also had the deep brain stimulation surgery, and she is doing remarkably well with that. It's changed her life.
Yeah. She said, I don't know if I ever remember eating soup with a spoon. I drank it out of a cup. Since she's had DBS, she has been able to eat with a spoon. Again, she's in a family with Parkinson's and essential tremor. Oh.
And can you explain what a person can expect from the process?
Well, they go in and put 2 holes in your brain and go down with a lead that's about 4 inches and has 4 magnetic spots on it. And they go into the area of the Parkinson's where the dopamine, and then they do that surgery first. And with mine, then I had both of the generators that are in my chest. And then 2 weeks after that, I had it hooked up. And it takes about 6 months to a year to really program it to where it is giving you the best with your Parkinson's. But I go back and see my doctor every 6 months, and she's a movement specialist in Colorado. And the last 2 times she has done nothing with my programming. That she feels like it's right on target. And I do have the opportunity. It's just like a phone. And you can go in and you can increase or decrease the right side or the left side. But remember, the left side of the brain controls the right side. And so you can, and I have, my Parkinson's is tremor with dystonia. Dystonia is when your fingers will lock up and you'll just have to unfold them, or your legs, the muscles in your legs get tight. And it always seems to happen when I sit down to relax or in bed. And then if it happens 2 or 3 nights in a row, then I usually get up and increase the generators by 500ths on whichever side it is happening on. If it's both, then I do both.
Excellent. All right. Well, you both had mentioned something about medication. How else is Parkinson's treated?
Well, it's treated with medications, and there are a lot of different medications. The pharmaceutical companies are really working to provide medications for off times, or so that your dopamine or your sentiment works longer. They are doing medications for hallucinations, and they're working on that now. The last podcast that I watched on that, they said about 50% will develop hallucinations over time as the disease progresses. To me, watching that was scary, but I know that it's going to be a possibility with the disease that I have. And so I just think with all the mechanical and the medications, we're seeing a lot of new things in all the clinical trials.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about the Parkinson's Families of Northwest Kansas. Let's discuss what that is and what you guys do with that.
Well, we started a couple of years ago. We had to get a 501c3, of course, and that kind of thing to get started. And we got a grant from Dane Hansen, which allowed us to have classes every week. We meet at 10 o'clock on Wednesdays with what we call Power Moves, which is Parkinson's Wellness Recovery Moves. And that involves a lot of different activities to get the brain and the body connecting. And we try to use both sides of the body. We have a excellent leader. Brenda Masnick owns the facility where we meet, and she leads us, and we use our rhythm and voice, because that's one of the things that people will start to lose with the progression of Parkinson's is their voice. I don't know if you touched on that a little bit, how the voice just starts to fade. And so the therapies for voice and physical therapies and speech therapy. So we also, after our power moves, we'll have coffee and conversation, which that is such an important part of treating Parkinson's, is like Elaine had said, having community and connecting with people. And then we'll have time for about an hour. We have physical therapists, or our speaker last week was a chiropractor. And we've also had speech therapists, and
this week we have drum circles.
Right.
But the very first year that we decided to do this, we got a grant from the Parkinson's Foundation. And it was a pilot. The grant was written for rural areas of the United States, and that was how we got it. Well, when we wrote it for just Colby, thinking people with Parkinson's would come. Well, when you have people of all ages and all stages, we found the first year, one, that very few men came, and two, they didn't want to drive out of their communities. So the second year, we added 2 communities, Quinter and Sharon Springs and Colby. And then throughout that year, I made contact with every one of the hospitals, and we ended up by the end of last June having everyone in all the 9 counties say we want to be a part of this. We have since added Waukene, and so they're a part of it in Trego County. And Tribune is part of Sharon Springs' clinic, so Tribune also has their county. We have had a few others ask about it, but at this point, that's where we're at. We're in about 11 counties.
Excellent. That's amazing. What can you guys give as far as advice for those caregivers out there that maybe, especially at a first diagnosis, it might be a little bit devastating? What can you say about that?
Well, they need support groups. There's a special place in heaven for the caregivers, and we have lost a couple of people that are caregivers, or people with Parkinson's, and the things that the caregivers have gone through. you don't have a clue when you have Parkinson's. And so we would like to start some support groups, both for caregivers and Parkinson's, where we would have them in separate rooms, but we could do it Zoom, where we could have discussion. So we kind of talked about that, but we haven't moved on to the next step. But caregivers need a lot of support.
Absolutely. And tell us about the required physical intake screening assessment.
Brenda does an intake so that she knows what you're capable of if you have Parkinson's or essential tremors. We have people at all stages that are in our group, some with walkers, some do their exercises sitting down, standing up. She does that intake to find out how much support the caregiver's going to have to give while she leads the exercises. And then she likes to see everyone in all the sites so that she can have the leaders help with the correction if they're doing it wrong or if they're doing it to cause more pain in their back or whatever. So,
sure. All right. Well, we are going to go to the phone lines. We've got a caller waiting to ask a question. We've got Kathleen on the line right now from Great Bend. Hi, Kathleen. Go ahead with your question about Parkinson's tonight.
Hello, this is Catherine Piper, and I wanted to ask your guests about the tremors that they had, and after their diagnosis, I'm a retired RN, and this has just been starting. A tremor in the left side and in my arm, and I don't. The closest neurologist I have is Salina. I've had a seizure disorder now for over 50 years. And I just wondered if, and I'm not getting much help from neurology, just wondered if they could refer me to someone out there, or I could speak with their group to get me on track with some help.
I would recommend, because you're in Great Bend, I live in Colby, and so my closest specialists are Denver. I did go to KU for about 6 months, but I went back to Denver when we started talking about deep brain stimulators. I would encourage you to check into Wichita. Wichita has, you would want to see a movement specialist, which is an individual that has 2 more years of schooling and 2 to 4 more years of residency than a neurologist. And they specialize in movement. And so you would probably want to see, I don't know why you couldn't self-refer or call, and you could go to KU Med Center also, because that's where I was at the University of Kansas. They have a Parkinson's and essential tremor unit. And I saw them initially every 3 months. So you could either do Wichita or KU. And I probably would just call and ask if they would be able to would have someone that could see you. And they may follow you for 6 months to a year. Mom was followed 2 years before she was actually diagnosed. I was followed for 8 years and never got a diagnosis. So sometimes it can look like other things and it's really Parkinson's. Sometimes it's the other way around. So those would be the 2 places I would start.
All right. Wonderful advice. Well, thank you so much for being our guest tonight. If you would like more information or would like to contact Parkinson's Families of Northwest Kansas, You can email Secretary Crystal Berg at parkinsons@movingtolive.org, or you can call or text their director, Elaine Potocek, at 785-443-3439, or find them on Facebook at facebook.com/Parkinson's Families. Thank you again for being our guest tonight. We really appreciate it. We covered a lot of really good information to Elaine Potocek and Colleen Dixonman. Our next Doctors on Call will be discussing pet health with veterinarian Brandon Wiedhoft of Big Creek Veterinary Service. You can also email questions for our next program. That address is doctors@shptv.org. Thank you for joining us for Doctors on Call. I'm Jenna Miller.
Presentation of Doctors on Call on Smoky Hills PBS is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from